Masechet Baba Kama Daf Non Chet. Nafla legina v'nehenit meshalemet ma shenehenit. The Mishnah said that if my any animal fell, let's say it was on a higher level in walking in the street, and it fell, it slipped on something, and it fell down onto your garden bed, and it got benefit from it. I have to pay that which it benefits. I don't have to pay the damage, that amount of the damage, which would probably be more, but rather just the amount that my animal benefited. So we're going to see what kind of benefit are we talking about. Amarav benehbeta. We're talking about the benefit of your garden breaking the fall of my animal. So my animal fell. It was not, it was honest. It was, I didn't push it or put it there on purpose or anything like that. It just fell, and it would have been hurt if it went straight onto the ground. Instead, it fell on your nice tomatoes, and that broke its fall. So I have benefit from that. How much is that benefit? Either how much would I pay for it, for it not to have fallen, and not get injured, or how much would I pay for hay that would have broken its fall? I don't have to pay for the full value of these very nice tomatoes that you have, but I have to pay for the amount of benefit that I got. So that's the benefit that it's talking about. That's all that I've said. One word, benechbeta. But now we're going to figure out what would he think about eating. But if my animal fell again into your garden and then started eating, even that which it benefits, I don't have to pay. Not only do I not have to pay the damage, I don't even have to pay for the benefit, right? That's what it seems. If Rav says I only have to pay for benefit of breaking its fall, so that means I don't have to pay anything for it after it fell, it eating there. Now, we're going to try to figure out the reason. Why would Rav say that I do have to pay for breaking its fall, but not for food? Sounds logically, it seems it should be the opposite, which is what we're going to conclude. But right now, let's try out this theory, and we're going to say, well, Rav is following his own opinion that he said elsewhere, that the animal should not have eaten. Rav said this a few dapim ago, in a case where, let's say you put your food in my courtyard without permission. I didn't ask you to put your food there. You just came and did it. My animal goes and eats it and gets a stomach ache from it. It was some kind of, bad fruit or whatever. And I come to sue you. I say, I want you to pay damages for having harmed my animal. You could give this claim, this is Rav's claim that he said before, and say, your animal should not have eaten. Well, who asked your animal to eat food that was bad for it? So it's my own animal's fault for eating it. So Rav said that over there, and maybe here, that in that case, the person that put the fruit there makes the claim, so he doesn't have to pay for that damage to the animal. Maybe here, I, the owner of the animal, can say the same claim. My animal should not have eaten, and that way, say I don't have to pay you for what it ate when it fell into your garden. So we say, no, that makes no sense. Amri, hachi hashta, is that these comparable? Emor da'amar Rav hatam hayalat shelo tochal hechadi'it tazekahi demase amar le mare de pere la mishalamna. In that case, it made sense that Rav would make the claim the animal should not have eaten, when the animal itself, it was the harmed party, and then, in that case, the owner of the fruit can say, I'm not paying you, right? Because it should not have eaten. But you think Rav would therefore say that the same claim, it should not have eaten, when the animal is the one that causes damage to someone else's produce, and therefore the owner of the animal would not have to pay? That is completely illogical. So it does not make sense to apply Rav's statement in this case, right? In that case, it was to make sure that the owner of the produce doesn't have to pay for damage to the animal, that the owner of the produce doesn't have to pay for damage of the animal. It does not mean that the owner of an animal doesn't have to pay for damage to the produce that the animal ate. That would make no sense for the owner of the animal himself to make this claim. So you know what? We go back and we change our minds. Lami baya kamar Rav, when he said this one word, nechbeta. He wasn't saying that to exclude the payment for eating, but rather he was assuming it as follows. He was saying, Lami baya is not necessary to say, Lami baya dachla meshalem ma she'enit. Of course, obviously, if my animal fell into your garden and then just started eating, obviously I have to pay. Now, because it fell in just by mistake, not that I was negligent and sent it in there or allowed it to go in there. If I allow it to go in there, or just I'm not careful with it and it goes in and walks in, that would be a case of shen and regel, in which I am liable for damages. But here, because it fell in totally by accident, not through any negligence, therefore I do not have to pay damages. But I still do have to pay that which it ate. It ate these very expensive tomatoes. I don't have to pay that much, but I have to pay for the calories that it would have eaten if it was eating just straw. אבל נכפתה אם המבריח ערי מנכסי חברו מה שניתנה לה משלם כמשמע להן. So obviously, if it eats, I'm going to have to pay that which it benefits. But I might have thought, if Rav didn't say anything, that if it hit the ground and it got benefit of being the tomatoes were a cushion, I might have thought that in that case we can apply the category of mafriach ari, repelling a lion. This is a case where you pass by my field and you notice that there's a lion approaching and it's going to do damage to my property, and you, a good citizen, you take the effort and the risk and you scare away the lion so it doesn't do any damage to me. So chazak ubaruch, I owe you one. I don't literally owe you one. I don't owe you any money. You did a great mitzvah, but I don't have to pay you in that case, right? You're a good citizen that you scared away the lion. So that's a general category of halacha when you do a good thing for someone else. But you don't get paid for it because you didn't spend any money on it and I didn't ask you to do it. So maybe in this case it would be the same thing, that my animal fell. You did a good deed, good citizen. You broke my animal's fall by having those tomatoes conveniently placed right where my animal would fall. And so therefore I would think that just like the guy who scares away a lion cannot claim payment, so too here the owner of the tomatoes cannot claim payment. Kamash malan, and that's what I have to say. Not, of course, if my animal eats the food, I have to pay for what it benefits. But I might have thought maybe I don't have to pay for the cushioning effect, and that's why it teaches, yes, I do have to pay for the benefit of using your garden as cushions, and it's not the same as scaring away a lion. And now we ask, why don't in fact we say that? Maybe it should be like scaring away a lion, and maybe then I could, if I'm the owner of the ox that fell in, I could say, thank you for helping my animal by cushioning its fall, but I don't have to pay you. And now we say, no, that's not the same. There are two differences. When you come and you scare away a lion, that's with your knowledge and intent. You decide, oh, I see a danger, I'm going to be a good citizen and scare away a lion. But here, you had no knowledge of it. You were inside sipping tea. You had no idea that my animal was about to fall and then fell and landed conveniently on your tomatoes. You didn't decide that, oh yeah, I'm going to save your animal with my tomatoes. So that is one difference. When you go and save and scare away the lion, you don't lose out any financially. You take some time to do that and some courage, but you're not losing any money. But here, you are losing money. There's a loss to your garden bed. And therefore, makes sense that although I don't have to pay a full amount of damages because it was a complete accident, but I do have to at least pay that which I receive benefit from. Hechi nefal. Now we ask, what are the circumstances? How did it fall? What level of accident do we need? Rav Kana amar shehuchleka b'memei ragleha. Rava amar shedechafta chaberta. Rav Kana says that the animal slipped on its own urine, and in which case the owner, how's the owner supposed to know that it was going to urinate then and then slip on its own urine, right? So this is totally out of the owner's control. Rava says that another ox came and pushed it in, which is also pretty accidental, but not quite as accidental, because the owner could have prevented the animals from being next to each other. So if you say that I don't have to pay full damages when one animal pushes the other, all the more so if it slips on its own urine, then I would not have to pay, because that's an even a bigger accident, so I don't have to pay full damages. I only have to pay the amount that it benefited. פשעה ומשלמת מה שהזיקה. דאמר לה, היא באה אלך עבורי חדה חדה. But the opinion that said that when do I not have to pay full damages when it slips on its urine, because that's a total mistake. But if two animals are too close to each other and one pushes the other and it falls off the cliff, then that is called negligence. And then the owner of the animal has to pay full amount of that which it damaged, because the owner of the garden can say, you should have led your animals one by one. If you saw this was an area that was a narrow pass that's at the edge of a cliff and the animal could fall down into my property, then you should have been more careful to make them move one by one and not two by two, or so next to each other that one would push the other over. So although this is an accident, it's not as accidental as slipping on its urine. So these are just different levels of accident, and that's machloket. Amar Rav Kahana, lo shanu ela beota aruga, avam aruga la aruga mishalemet ma shehizika. So when we say that I only have to pay limited damages when my animal falls down into your garden bed, I have to pay only for benefit of the smashed tomatoes, and also naturally it's going to eat once it gets up and it's there, it's going to eat from that garden, that patch. So there also I don't have to pay full damages, but that leniency is only for that garden bed. If then my animal starts going around and eating from the next garden bed and the next one, then I have to pay full damages according to Rav Kahana. However, Rabbi Yochanan amar afilu me'aruga la'aruga, afilu kol hayom kulo ad sheteseh v'tachzor le'da'at. Yochanan says the owner of the animal does not have to pay, even if it eats from one garden bed and goes to the next one and eats, and goes to the next one and eats, even all day long it's eating from different gardens, because all that is a result of the original fall, which was totally accidental and out of the hands of the owner. And so once it falls, so it's naturally going to eat until it comes back with the owner's knowledge, and then the owner can watch it again. But in the meantime, what was I supposed to do? It fell, and then it started wandering around and eating. It's all part of the same one single incident. It's not a different incident just because it moved on to another garden bed. So that's Rabbi Yochanan. Amar Papa lo tema ad sheteseh ledat v'tachzor ledat. Papa is commenting on Rabbi Yochanan and says, don't think that when Rabbi Yochanan says v'tachzor ledat, don't think that means that it leaves the garden patch with the owner's knowledge and goes back also with the owner's knowledge. Only then the owner is fully liable for damages. Rather, it's we're going to a little bit more stringent on the owner of the animal than that. Once it leaves the garden patch with the owner of the animal's knowledge, so now the owner knows that he left. Even if the owner didn't know and see it go back in, still the owner is liable and to make sure that it doesn't go back in. Because the owner of the garden can say, listen, now that your animal knows where the spot is, he learned that there's nice fruit here in my garden, so now every time it strays, it's going to automatically run to my garden. Therefore, you have to be even more careful. So at the time that it fell down and it's walking around, and so then the owner of the animal says, it's not in my power to stop it. It just fell with total accident. It's going around, and I didn't get it back yet. So that's fine. Then you only have to pay the smaller amount of that which it benefits. But once it comes back to the owner says, oh, here is my animal. What happened? He finds out what happened. It went to this. Then he has to be extra careful to make sure it doesn't go out of his sight again, because otherwise it will naturally go back to that garden, and then the owner is fully responsible if it goes back. Even if he didn't see it go back, he has to make sure that it won't. The next part of the Mishnah is a contrast with the previous case. Yarada kedarka Vizika mishalimit mashe zika. If, unlike the previous case where it fell by accident, if the animal goes down into someone else's garden in a normal way, just walking there, and causes damage, either by trampling or by eating, then the owner has to pay the full amount of the damage. Now we have a curious case. The animal went down in its usual manner. And so if it went and started trampling and eating, I would have to pay a full amount. But that's not what happened. It did go down, and then so that was negligence on the part of the owner of the animal for letting it go down there. But then the damage was caused by it all of a sudden giving birth. Its water broke, amniotic fluid got all over the place, which is a very unusual type of, an unexpected type of damage. So what do we say about that? Where at the beginning it was negligent, but in the end, the way it caused damage was not through the negligence, but a total accident. If we follow the opinion that says, when I start off an action in being negligent, in the end, although it was a total accident, I'm nevertheless liable. Like if I decide I'm going to drive drunk and then I get my brakes fail, total accident, not my fault, and I get into an accident that way, so nevertheless I am liable, even though the brakes would have failed if anyone else was driving. They also wouldn't have got to the same accident. Doesn't matter, because I got into the car drunk, so I am liable for everything that happens afterwards. So according to that opinion, obviously in this case also he would be liable. But according to the other opinion that says, even though I started off as being negligent, but in the end the actual accident happened through a total accident, honest, and therefore I would be patur in general. So would we apply that same principle in this case and say I'm not liable? On one hand you can say, yes, this is exactly the case. I started off being negligent by allowing my animal to go in to your field, but then the fact that it all of a sudden gave birth in your field, honest, I don't have to pay. Or do we say, no, this is all negligence, because I, as the owner of the animal, saw it's close to giving birth, right? I know its due date. I see that it's already having some birth pangs. So I should have watched it and taken care of it and made sure it was in a good spot near the hospital, near a safe place for it to go and give birth. Teku, and we leave this question standing. Kesad mishalim ma shehizika. Now the Mishnah continues and says, how do we estimate in this case, like where it goes and damages something with just regular shen and regel, goes into someone else's property and causes damage by trampling or by eating, in which case I have to pay the full amount of damage. How do we estimate the damage? And the Mishnah said that you take a whole bet se'ah of a field, right? A whole area of a field, and you say, how much would it be worth with this garden bed in it? And then how much would it be worth without the garden bed in it, and subtract the difference. And that ends up being a smaller amount than if you would go count by each tomato that was damaged. So this is a benefit for the mazik, would have to pay relatively less with this appraisal method. How do you know that this is the right way to appraise? Amar Rav Matana Amar Kerau bi'ir b'steh acher melamed sheshamin al gav sedeh acher. The pasuk says, we can look at it for a minute. Ki aved ish sedeh acher v'shilachet be'iro u'bi'ir b'steh acher. If a man causes a field or vineyard to be in, and he puts his beast there, and it eats in another person's field. So that's all the case, and the consequences, metav seder metav karmo, Yisraelim have to pay from the best of mine. So here it says ubi'ayr bisdeh acher. So from these words here, we learn that when we appraise, it's in comparison with a sedeh acher, with another field. In other words, we take the field with the damage and we compare it to the same field without the damage. Now we say, wait a second, you can't use this phrase to teach me how to appraise because we need it for another law, that shen and regel do not apply in the public domain. Only bisteacher, in a different field owned by someone, that then it applies, but not in an ownerless area. But then we said, no, actually we can learn two things, because if it was only going to teach that it does not apply in the Shut HaRabim, but only in the Shut HaYachid, then it could have written, and it went and ate something in a friend's field, or in another field without the word be. Without in another field, it could have just said, Ubi'er sede'acher. It destroyed another field, not in another field. And so the fact that it has that extra bet means that we can learn two things from it. Not only that it does not only applies in private property, but also that we assess it based on by comparing the values of two properties. Wait a second, maybe in that case I need the whole phrase to teach me about how to appraise, and then it wouldn't be a source for the Shut HaRabim at all. And then, well, how would I know that Shen and Regel do not apply in the Shut HaRabim? And the answer to that is, Imken lechteber achamana gabe tashlumin metav sedu metav karmo yishalem bisteacher lama lidechatber achamana gabe ubi'er shemamina tarteh. Because if it was going to teach me only that this is how to pay, how to appraise for payment, then this phrase should have been in the section of the payment. It should have said metav sedu metav karmo yishalem bisteacher, because then you're going to pay based on an evaluation of sedeacher. It should have been in the second clause, the then clause. But the fact that it's in the case, the if clause in the case, means that's telling us something also about the case, that the case is only when it's in private property and not when it's in public domain. And so, in fact, yes, we can learn two different laws from this one compound phrase. We next get into the details of exactly how to make this appraisal. Hechi shaiminan, amar biyoseh bar chanina, se'a b'shishim se'in. If we have damage, that this animal came in and ate some vegetation in an area that's a se'ah, what we do is we measure it in ratio to an area of 60 se'ah. In other words, if you look at one se'ah, the damage to this by itself, it'll be a certain number. But if you look at it in relation to a huge area, 60 times it, then the damage will be appraised relatively less. Kind of think of it as this, as follows. If you do damage to my house, so then it's going to be a certain number. But let's say you do damage to, I own a whole apartment building, and each apartment is as big as that house, and you do damage to one apartment in the apartment building, well, then it's going to be appraised as relatively less, because that's just the way appraisals work. If you look at one thing alone, then you're going to appraise it for more, whereas when you look at the damage of just one item within a whole collection of 60 of the same item, then the appraisal will be less. So that's how we make it less. Rabbi Yanai amar tarka b'shishim tarkabim. Rabbi Yanai says, no, not that we don't do it as a whole se'ah, but rather as a tarkab. That is 3 kav, which is equivalent to half of a bet se'ah. So in other words, we're going to look at a smaller area, and it's the same ratio of 60, but nevertheless it's a smaller amount altogether, which will also make a difference. Besides the ratio, if you do damage to 10 apartments out of 100, that as opposed to 100 apartments out of a huge complex of 1,000, right? Still, the 100 out of 1,000 will end up less than the 10 out of 100, just because the absolute numbers also make a difference. And again, even though the damage is exactly the same, nevertheless, the ratios and the size of the numbers does make a difference when one is appraising, because appraisals take into account subjective understanding of, like if you're buying a $1 billion company and then someone steals a few paper clips from it, it's not going to make a difference in the evaluation as it would if I was buying some very small thing. Okay, Chizkiah amar kelach b'shishim kelachim. Chizkiah says we take each stalk that it damaged, we take it in relation to 60 stalks. So even if I damage this one particular stalk, that would have cost $1, but the damage within the context of 60, how much if you had 60 good stalks and that, or versus 59 good and 1 damaged, how much difference of that price would that make in the total? Maybe the difference in price then would only be 80 cents. Okay, so that's the 3 different opinions. We have a challenge. Here we have a braita that says, if my animal came and ate 1 kav or 2 kav of vegetation, we don't say that we pay directly that amount of everything that it damaged, but rather we view it as a small garden bed and evaluate it that way. So it seems to mean that we look at it not only the actual individual things, but we look at it within the context. Now, doesn't that mean that still you're looking at the garden bed by itself, not in relation to 60 times it? So we say la b'shishim. No, that's what it means. It means within a ratio of 60. Tanu Rabbanan en shamin kav mipnei shemashpicho v'lo bet kol mipnei shepogmo. This braita says that when we make such an evaluation, we don't evaluate it based on a kav size, because that will increase it. Kav is too little. Right over here, there was the smallest opinion was was each stalk, but the other opinion, the between one, was 3. Tad is try, like in Greek try, 3 kav. So if you use one kav evaluation, then that ratio is too small, and that will end up making the price too high. And velo bet kod is huge. Kod is 30 se'ah. And so if you do it in relation to that huge amount, then the appraisal will be too small. It'll be too small. Now, what exactly does this mean? My kamar, we'll see 2 interpretations. Amar papa, hachi kamar, en shamin kab b'shishim kabim, mipnei shemashbiach mazik, velo kol b'shishim korin, mipnei shepogem mazik. Papa explains that we should not make an evaluation based on 1 kav in the ratio of 60 kav, because then the price will be too high for the mazik. You'll have to pay more because the kav is a relatively small amount. Right up here, the middle opinion was tri kav, 3 kav. So that would be a proper for it to be anai. Chizkiah Drew said smaller amount, they'd even 1 stalk. But anyway, in this interpretation, 1 kav would be too small of a ratio, and a cord in 60 cord. A cord is huge. That's 30 se'ah. In that case, it would be so big that it would be end up being a very weak, very small amount for the mazik to have to pay. So that's how Rav Papa is interpreting it. But kifla Rav Huna bar Manoah chai velo bet kod velo kod mi ba'ele. That doesn't fit the words, because here, look, notice how it says en shamin kav, and then the parallel would be velo kod. It doesn't say bet kav and bet kod. It says kav and then says bet kod, which means it's not just comparing 2 different ratios. It's saying something different. Ela amar Rav Huna bar Manoch mished Rav Acha bered Rav Ika hachi katani en shamin kav b'fnei asmo b'pnei shemashbiach nizak velo kav bet kol mipnei shepogem nizak ela b'shishim. Here's what it means. We do not make an evaluation of 1 kav by itself. If it did injury and it ate 1 kav, we're not going to evaluate the damage just based on that, because then it will be a high evaluation, and that will benefit the nizak too much. We also aren't going to measure it 1 kav of damage compared to a huge ratio of a cord, which would be many, many times more, because then that would make the amount too little, and that would damage the amount gotten by the nizak. Rather, not too much, not too little, right in between is 1 out of 60. We ended off with a story that demonstrates this principle that we evaluate not based on the damage all by itself, but rather in relation to a bigger ratio, as we discussed. We're also going to see, does this bigger ratio evaluation, which ends up being a smaller amount, Does this apply only when an animal causes damage? Or what about when a human himself causes damage? So here's the story. A certain man cut down a date palm tree of another person. Not his animal, he did it himself. And they came to Resh Galuta, he's the head of the whole Jewish community in Bavel, to be the judge. Talata bekina havu kaime vavu shavu me'azuze zilhab le tilatinu tilata vetilata. So the Resh Galuta says, listen, I saw that place where that date palm was, and it actually had 3 palms altogether, and they were worth 100 dinar altogether, and you cut one of them down, therefore you have to pay a third, which would be 33 1/3 dinar, right? Makes sense. So he has to pay. Here he's evaluating directly the amount of the damage itself. Amar gabedesh galuta de da'in dinar de farsa'a lamali. So that guy didn't like the verdict. It was too high. And he said, oh, see, I went to go get judged by the Resh Galuta, the Exilarch, and he followed Persian law. I want to follow halakha, which is very interesting for a number of reasons. Number one, we can get an insight into Persian law that said you evaluate things directly. Also, this is a jab at the Exilarch. The Exilarch often were Talmidei Chachamim, but not always. Sometimes they were made fun of for taking on too many Persian customs and practices. Look, they were head of the community, and they had to interact with the Persian nobles. So they would dress the part and speak the part, and maybe sometimes it would get to their head. And so they were often very learned, sometimes not necessarily the most learned. And so here this guy is making fun of the Exilarch. Well, he has personal motive to do so, and saying, oh, he's just following Persian law. I want to follow the halacha because I know the halacha is going to be more lenient on the payer, on the damager, and to evaluate as 1/60. So Atalik Kamed Rav Nachman Amale Bishishim. And in fact, he went to Rav Nachman, and Rav Nachman says, no, we're going to look at this in relation as if it were in an area that were 60 times its size, and see what would be the value of the entire big area, 60 times its size, with the tree and without the tree. And so that is going to be evaluated as a much smaller amount. And so the guy liked that evaluation better. Amar le Rava, im amru b'nizkeh mamono, yomru b'nizkeh gufo. Rava, however, rejected Rav Nachman applying the 60 evaluation rule to a human causing damage. He says, if the rabbi said that about an animal causing damage, nizkeh mamono, something that I own causes damage, like my animal, yeah, okay, fine. If my animal causes, that's more indirect. So therefore it makes sense to be more lenient on the mazik. But if one causes damage himself, like this guy did, he went and cut down the tree himself. So we don't say that. Rather, he should pay the full amount of damage according to a straightforward evaluation. So that's Rava, who says that we make a distinction. However, Rav Nachman did not, and Abaye is going to challenge Rava, and Abaye is also going to argue that there is no distinction. You always do the 60 evaluation. What's your source for saying that when a human being causes damage that he has to pay for the straightforward evaluation? Is it because we have a braita as follows? The Tanya, hamavkir karmo shel chavero semadaro inoto kama hayta yafe kodem lachen vekama hi yafa lachar mikan veilu b'shishim lo katani. Maybe it's because there's a braita here that says someone destroys someone else's vineyard while the grapes are budding. And so, this is a curious case because when they're budding, they're still not worth very much, but they're potentially worth very much. And so, how much would you pay for this budding grape? Not much. But in, just a few days, when it does grow, it will be worth much more. So how do we evaluate that? We look at the amount of the vineyard before it was destroyed and after it was destroyed. But this is a more direct method of appraisal, not if it were within a whole area of 60. You see that we don't do that. So is that why Abaye is asking Rava? Because you have a braita here that says we do a direct evaluation because it's a human being that caused the damage and it doesn't say 60. Well, that's not a good enough reason because we have a similar braita that's talking about an animal causing damage, and he uses the same type of language. And we're supposed to know that it means that you're going to use the 60 method of evaluation. So it doesn't always, a Braita doesn't always say so explicitly. And just like in the following Braita regarding animals, we can assume it's doing the 60 ratio evaluation. So too for humans, we can assume the 60 ratio evaluation. That's the butt of his argument. But we're going to quote along, but so I don't want to get lost. Don't we have a braita regarding an animal doing damage, and it uses the same language as you did for the human causing damage? And here's the long baraita, the Tanya. Katma neti'a Rabbi Yosef Omer, gozrei gezerot b'Yerushalayim omrim neti'a bat shenata shete chesef bat shete shanim arba chesef. Achla chaziz Rabbi Yosef HaGalili Omer, nidon b'mshuyar shebo, v'chamim omrim ro'in ota kama hita yafa v'kama hi yafa. If an animal broke a sapling, that a young tree that didn't bring fruit yet, Rabbi Yosef says the judges in Jerusalem, they said if it was within his first year, you have to pay 2 silver. If it's 2 years old, you have to pay 4 silver. So you see, it's giving all amounts, and it's clearly talking about an animal that's causing this damage. If an animal eats unripe blades of grass, of grain, so this is obviously an animal eating it. People don't eat this. This is for pasture. Rabbi Yosef says we see what remains of it, and we judge based on the leftover, because it's hard to tell what it ate because we don't know exactly what was there before, but we can evaluate based on what's left over. And the rabbis say we see how much was the field worth before he destroyed it, and how much is it worth now. You see, in none of these cases do we say the 60 rule, but it's assumed. Baraita continues, Hachlas semadar, if the animal ate grapes at a budding stage, Rabbi Yosef Omer, Roinotan ki'ilu hen anavim omdot li baser. We imagine as if the grapes are about to be picked, and we evaluate based on the potential, the future amount once they grow. Hachamim omrim ro'in kama hi yafa ve'kama hi yafa. The rabbi said we see how much was it worth before the damage and how much was it worth after the damage, and we subtract. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda Amir mishum Rabbi Shimon. במדים הם אומרים בזמן שאכלו בגפנים ויוחרי תאנים, אבל פגים או בוסר הוא נותן כאילו ענבים עומדות להיבשר. Rabbi Shimon, the son of Yehuda, says the name of Rabbi Shimon. That when is that true that we assess the vineyard or the group of trees that was damaged? That's when the animal ate young branches of vines or shoots of trees. But if they ate unripe figs or unripe grapes, then we evaluate based on if they were ready to be picked. Right? How we can tell from now, even though it didn't, it's not ripe yet, we can tell how much it will be when it ripens. That's the end of the Braita. And here's the point again. Katani mihat chachamim omrim mironotan kama hi yafa ve'kama hi yafa ve'lo katani b'shishim. When chachamim say we should evaluate how much it was worth versus how much it is worth after the damage, we don't say we evaluate it within a context as if it were part of something 60 times greater than it, and we say something 60 times bigger than this without this damage and with this damage, and compare those, which would be a much smaller amount. It doesn't say it here, but obviously it's talking about animals. So, even though it doesn't say so, we're assuming that it means relative to 60 times greater than it. And here too, regarding human beings, we're going to assume it means in a context of 60 times relative to it, and therefore Abaye agrees with Rav Nachman and disagrees with Rava, and thinks that there's no difference between the way we evaluate whether it's an animal causing the damage or a human being causing the damage. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen ve'amen.